Hi everybody, welcome to Futuring Friday. My name is Ray Poynter and I'm joined here by Lenny Murphy.
Hi everybody, glad to be here. Our annual end to the Festival of NewMR, Ray.
It is. And I'm just
always fun.
Going to run through a few housekeeping announcements and then we'll get on to the meat of the conversation. So first of all, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors. There are some costs associated, as you will not find surprising with something like NewMR. We have the website, we have to go to webinar licenses, some tech, some admin. So we are delighted to thank Zappy Store, who are our platinum sponsor for 2016. We're also delighted to thank all of our gold sponsors. So Kinesis, who are now part of the Focus Vision family, Saros, Mesh, Kriya, Dub, L&D Research, Happy Thinking People, Instantly, who are now part of the SSI family, Question Pro, and latest and most welcome on the list, Research Now. So thanks to all of those. Please visit their website. The more times you can click on their links on our site, the better it is for us. So that's a little something you can do there. Donations. We have been overwhelmed in the first 2 months of this year by the number of people who've made a small contribution, typically $20, towards the cost of running it. We've raised enough in January and February to pay for the GoToWebinar license for January and February. We have a license for up to 500 people to attend. That has a cost that you can work out fairly easily. So it's great that we've had those. What's going to be going on today? We've got a 90-minute conversation. You're going to see all the panelists in just a moment. We want to hear from you, though. We want to hear your questions. So you can either use Twitter, use #NewMR, or within the GoToWebinar platform, there is a questions tool. You can type your questions in there and we'll see that and we will make sure that it gets into the mix at the right place. The quicker you ask a question, the more likely it is to be taken. If we've moved the conversation on, it's usually quite difficult to go back and pick it up. The slides and recordings from the festival are going to be available from the Play Again. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday's recordings and slides are already available. Today's recording will be available by tomorrow morning, and then you'll be able to listen to it all again, listen to the elements that you missed, and so on. So I'm going to hand over to Lenny to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Ray. So we have an esteemed group of panelists joining us today. First, we have Melanie Courtright, EVP at Research Now. Want to say hi, Mel?
Hi, everyone.
And we've got Steve Phillips, CEO of Zappy Store.
Hello, folks.
We have Kristin Luck, the growth hacker herself, joining us. So, Kristin.
Hi, Lenny. Hi, everyone.
And then the man, the myth, the legend, Finn Raben, Director General of SWR.
Thank you, Lenny. Hi, everyone.
So certainly some of the best and brightest in market research join us today to talk about the future. So, Ray, you want to launch us into the next or into the first topic?
Yeah. So we've asked each of our panelists to come along with a topic that they think we should be listening to in 2016, 2017, an opportunity, a threat. Maybe it's a combination of a threat and opportunity. So, Melanie, what have you got for us?
So today I wanted to talk about a game of follow the leader. In our space, we call it follow the consumer, follow the customer. The biggest opportunity and the biggest threat in our mind, in my mind, and what I want to talk about today is the concept that the consumer continues to change at a super fast pace, and it creates big opportunities for newcomers and new clients and new types of research, but it also creates a ton of risk for doing things the same way that we've always done them in the past. I wanted to just sort of set the backdrop for this. In the past, and getting people to participate in research it's a direct marketing concern. And we've followed how the consumers have purchased things, their buying patterns. If you think back to door-to-door sales, we did in-home research. And when the event of mail order catalogs came along, we thought, let's do mail surveys. And then the phone sales era emerged, and we started doing phone-based surveys, and then online shopping and online research emerged, now mobile shopping, mobile buttons, and if you follow Mary Meeker, she says that the messaging and the online buying buttons are going to be some of the biggest changes coming in the next few years. The difference there, door to door and mail order, and then to phone, those were long adoption cycles, from phone to online and then online to mobile, and now bifurcation of mobile. Those are much faster adoption curves, and we're struggling to keep up with it. So the biggest challenge for us, I think, is going to be figuring out how to adopt faster, move faster, change everything faster, and follow the leader, which is the buyer, the consumer, at a much faster pace than we ever have before. So I guess my question is, what do you guys think we're doing well in adoption, and what do you guys think we're struggling with?
Well, I'm going to kick off with a question then for you, Melanie. Market research used to mostly be about fresh people who had not been involved in research in the last 6 months or a year. And when we went to the internet, we went to panel research. There'd always been some, but it became the main staple. So the vast majority of research now is done with somebody who, in the West, is done with somebody who is a member of an online access panel, or they're a member of a mobile panel, or they're on a customer list, or they're a member of a community, or something like that. And if we look at a lot of these things you're talking about, these buy buttons and so on, could we see a shift back to people who have not signed up, but actually who are being intercepted in a host of new ways?
Absolutely. I think you're seeing some of that with the technologies that are more about real-time sample, and those things aren't new. But I do think that mobile and buying buttons will bring a new way to engage people into the research space. But before everybody says panels are dying, panels are dead, that's just one type of research that's going to be enabled through those types of participants. If you want participants that are going to let you meter their machines and follow them where they go on the internet, or give you long tails of data, those are the types of research data sets that you get from people who will talk to you more than once. So there's going to be a place for both types of participants to live.
Lenny?
So how do we make that more
so?
attractive? How do we make that more attractive to consumers to engage in more of the traditional model, though? I think that's what concerns me, is we see the new stuff emerge. Before we started, we were talking about Ibotta, one of the slew of consumer-centric, gamified approaches where folks are rewarded for sharing data. I think we'll see more and more of that. But the value proposition for panels has always been a little bit different. So what can we do to engage the consumer more so that we can encourage them to let us follow them?
Well, and I'm happy for someone else to jump in and give an opinion on this, but for me, it absolutely comes down to how do we get consumers to do anything? It's through speed and ease, and the value proposition has to be right, as it always does, but speed and ease wins. We think about speed and ease a lot with market research buyers, the researchers in us, and we think about speed and ease on analytics and report generation, but we don't think enough about speed and ease on what we're asking participants who are giving us the data have to go through to give us that data. So keep the value proposition strong, but don't just throw incentives at people. You have to actually improve the experience all along the way and make it easy and fast for them to give us the data we need, and make them feel protected along the way. Short surveys, bite-sized things that you ask them to do, super clean, fast buttons that move along a survey. I think when we were, Lenny, you'll remember when we were in IEX, we did the hashtag No More Grids, Death of the Grids, the evil, evil grid. And the purpose of that was not just to throw stones at the grid. It worked in the past, but it was because it's not fast and it's not easy, and the people taking the surveys hate them. And so we just continue to have to think like tech people, and how do we make it easy and fast?
So, Melanie,
I'm curious what the new Research Choices Initiative. Sorry, Ray. I was just thinking about the Research Choices Initiative that SMR launched with Nielsen and GfK and Kantar, I believe. Whether that plays into that kind of advocacy for why consumers should engage from an experiential standpoint. Finn, is that a part of that program, or will it be?
Yes, I think we'd all hope it will be. It's a really interesting point, actually, because I think if you go back just one or two steps in that whole data, in the seeking of data, if you like, from anywhere, I think one of the things that we as a profession, we as an industry, have been perhaps a little less good at, is getting out there and shouting out loud about the value of contributing to research. And I think more and more, when you look on the news about, and you look, guys, I apologize because I'm sure you've heard me preaching about this from my soapbox for too long. But when you look at stuff like, how is a disease being fought in a particular country, or how do other, inhabitants of a particular jurisdiction want to talk about regime change, or any of that kind of stuff, that all comes from people who are willing to contribute and participate in research of all different shapes and sizes and colors and diversity, etc., etc. And I think, in Germany they do this thing once a year where they have a research day, and all of the companies kind of, stick in a few bucks into it. Well, it's more than a few bucks in fairness, into a substantial pot. And they go on a fairly major campaign to say, look, research is a good thing, and there are lots of guys who are going to be either knocking on your door or sending you stuff in mobile or sending you emails online to contribute information. And by participating in research, you're either making for a better society, a better business, a better product, etc., etc. And I think that's a really important message that we need to stress and underline, more and more, given the amount of noise that is out there. And that's what drove research choices. Audience measurement, which is the primary sector that it's, is an area that, for many is probably a little bit of a black box. How the hell do people know what I'm watching on TV? And research choice was a collaboration with between GfK, Kantar, Comscore, and Nielsen, to say, right, well, we're going to get some information out into the public domain to let people know what we do with the data and how it's collected and what it does. And I mean, we're incredibly privileged just simply to be the hosts of that particular service. And as I said, at the moment, it's targeted towards the audience measurement sector, but we would be, we're very hopeful that in the near future, it broadens out to all kinds of digital research.
So, just picking up on a couple of things out there in social media, there's a great point from Joel Rubinson that as well as the fast and easy, it's actually got to be entertaining. I think, Melanie, you were making that point too, that it's not enough for it to be quick and easy, but also it's actually got to be entertaining. And I think what Finn was just saying there, and or important. If people know their view matters, that also motivates them to take part. There's a great question coming in here from Ilka in the question tool about big data and data analytics. So we'll come back to that later rather than taking that at this point. So with that, Stephen, I'd like to ask you what is your topic, and just to introduce it briefly.
Sure. So I'm talking about a topic that has been mentioned before in the last year or two. People like Gutcheck are talking about it a lot, which is agility. I think, and there was great, Melanie was talking about speed, and there was a great post on Greenbook in the last couple of days talking about what Agile is and what Agile research can be. And one of the things we forget is that Agile doesn't necessarily mean fast. We're a software company at Zappi, and we build software in an Agile way. But that doesn't mean we build it quicker. It means we use a test and learn approach to the way we build. So if we think about it from a research perspective, so Agile research to me, instead of being sort of waiting until you've developed an ad or waiting until you've developed a product and then doing a large piece of research, Agile research would instead be during the development stage of the ad, during the development stage of the product, you would do iterative test and learn along the way. So instead of doing one big project, you would do several probably smaller projects. Now, if we look at Agile research, it is being forced upon us in some ways by business reality. So businesses are developing software or developing technologies using an Agile approach. Increasingly, digital campaigns And the idea and the concept of agility is pushing its way through businesses. So the research industry has to follow that trend and is being pushed to do it. I also think it's hugely good for the industry to do it, but we can't underestimate the impact that it's going to have. So if we think about the way that we can develop agile research, in order to turn things around quickly for those individual products, those individual surveys, it does mean that we need a lot of automation, and that's obviously our focus. But automation will change the nature of the industry in the same way that Agile will. So it'll mean a lot of smaller, fast-paced surveys. Gut Checker obviously doing this. A lot of communities actually work in a very agile way, enabled by technology. But the way it changes, I think, the nature of the industry is it means that there need to be a lot fewer people thinking about process. And because you're doing 5 projects instead of 1, you need a lot more people thinking heavily about the value of the data and what that data can do in terms of making decisions for clients relatively quickly, which I think requires a lot of high-end thinking about data. So a lot less process and a lot more high-end thinking. So it aligns very much with the GRIT report, which was talking about needing data scientists, business strategists. And I think it pushes us in that direction. So I think it's a trend that's going to carry on in sense that I don't think it's a trend. I think it's just a change in the industry. But I do think it'll have profound effects on the way that agencies manage themselves and work with clients and the way that client organizations work. So that was my thoughts.
So that's go ahead.
Stephen, I just had a question for you. I've had people ask me a few times lately, what's the difference between agile research, automated research, and quick turn research? Have you been asked that? Do you get asked that very often?
I'd say, well, yeah. And I think, as I said, the definition of agile obviously comes out of software. And to me, agile is about minimum viable product. It is about taking a test and learn approach. So I think in order to take a test and learn approach, you have to use automation because you simply can't turn things around quick enough with using people. So I think agile research forces you to automate. So that's the way I would look at it. And then, what was the third one?
Quick turn research, and I think it's similar, except quick turn, you may be able to get quick turn sort of a full report, but it might not be automated. So I'm thinking along the same lines you are. Quick turn research is clearly fast and lean. Automated means it's pretty heavily using technology, and agile means tag teaming types of research together or being agile in field to make changes as you go along. So I think I agree with you on that.
And I think one of the interesting things and the great things that being more agile prevents actually is that old thing in research of you're spending 6 to 8 weeks on a research project, and so there are 3 meetings about what the questionnaire is, and you throw in 4 other questions from someone else in another department because you're going into research, so you may as well ask those questions at the same time. And it makes
That's the waterfall style.
Exactly.
Waterfall style of research, yep.
Yeah, it makes you very focused on what is the business decision that you need to make and what is the minimum data I need to make that decision. And then you move on, and then you go to the next thing. So it makes it much more actionable, much more engaging, I think, both for the respondent but also for the client and the agency.
So totally agree with everything that you're saying, Stephen, from the process standpoint, but I think that it actually ties into Melanie's topic as well, as we move towards a much more iterative, almost qualitative at scale, if you would, type of process within a quantitative technology-enabled paradigm. We start to be able to engage respondents in much more rapid, iterative type of engagements instead of the big survey. And so to Joel's point, is that good enough, right? Can the benefits of automation and all of the benefits of agile and iterative and all of these wonderful things that are occurring now driven by technology, whether it's community-based or not, can that reach its potential if we're not absolutely engaging the consumers and getting their buy-in to participate.
Hey, Lenny,
So
can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, please, Kristin, go ahead.
Yeah, because I'm a huge fan of Agile, and Ryan Berry and I have riffed about Agile many times, and so to kind of support what Stephen's saying, but I think also to answer one of Melanie's questions, I think a lot of people, when they think of Agile research, sort of compare it to technology, and they think of the technology component behind it, which is not how I think about it at all. So when you look at kind of lean startup methods, which is what that Agile process is based on, it's this build, measure, learn cycle that actually melds beautifully with research practice, which is how do we learn things more quickly so we can iterate and produce really actionable data in a faster way, which is something that as researchers we've traditionally been pretty horrible about doing. If you think about, hey, I'm only going to field a 5-question survey, it's going to take me 2 days, and I'm going to get enough information on a 5-question survey to then decide, do I even need to ask the next 5 questions? Have I gotten what I need, or do I actually need to pivot and go down a different path? And that's the beautiful thing about Agile, and that's why I'm so excited, that as an industry, there's people starting to head in that direction. It's not, yes, Stephen's created a platform that enables that type of research to happen, but I think it's less about the technology and more about that actual design and that process, which hopefully more people will start to adopt.
Yeah, I like that. And I would say, just to kind of come back, Lenny, to your qualitative, quantitative question a moment ago, qualitative is in-depth interview, in-depth data that is not projectable to a large population in a numerical way, and quantitative is numerical data that you can project out. Agile can support both of those. It's not either or. It just is about the way you sample, the way you collect the data, and the quantity of the data you collect, and you can do Agile, automated, and quick turn for both qual and quant.
Stephen, I've got a
fair enough. Although
I've got a comment in here from one of the listeners for Stephen. I'm all for small-scale test and learn studies. Isn't that what Chiat Day did in the early days of US account planning, putting storyboards in front of consumers, moving along, reacting? Is this the same thinking dragged into the 21st century?
It may well be. I mean, I don't know much about Chiat Day and their planning. To be fair, I don't think it's a new idea, and we've often experimented. 10 years ago when I was doing qualitative research, we were doing some form of panel research where we might have groups, and we do a reconvene groups, etc. I don't think the desire or the idea of doing iterative testing is new. I think the technology is enabling us to do it a lot better and a lot more often. And I think we probably all thought it was the right thing to do, but because of the way we were doing research, it was just taking too long. So as soon as you can do research very quickly, it means that you're naturally in a test and learn mindset. You're naturally not thinking about other things you may chuck into the questionnaire. You're just thinking, okay, I need to learn about this. And I think the ability to do it is changing the way clients approach development. So particularly, I mean, we have, if you think about doing an ad test, for instance, how many times have you done an ad test where the client has spent ages with the researcher, with the ad agency, making sure that the storyboard is really perfect and looks beautiful and rich, because they're only testing it once, and so they've got to make sure the stimulus is incredible. Well, now we can say, oh, no, just throw in an idea. If you have an idea in the morning, throw an idea into the test it over lunchtime, come back to it in the afternoon. So that it changes the way they think about the stimulus they're using. They just think, okay, I've got this idea, I'll test that quickly. I'll learn from that, go on to something else. And so with the capability, you can do things you've always wanted to do, but just weren't able to do weren't able to do as quickly as you could before.
So on that point, Stephen, there's another question come in really specifically on that. So for agile approaches to work in research, it's not just the tools and the processes. Everyone's been saying that so far on the panel. research firms, practitioners, clients need to restructure and redesign their organization to make it possible. You just said people wanted to do this, but actually lots of people had gates. And the word gates really doesn't go with Agile, does it? You've got the stage gate approach to everything. What are the challenges in getting clients to rethink into an Agile mindset?
I think it is a behavior change. So we absolutely see that. The interesting thing, I think, from a research perspective is that we're not changing. It's not research that's changing a client mindset to working in a more agile way. It is the business context itself. So whether it's the fact that companies' software development teams are working in an agile way, or whether it's digital. Digital is by nature quite an agile environment. A/B testing is a very agile method. So the business zeitgeist is agile. And actually, I think businesses have been there before research agencies or the research industry. So whilst we do need to change research clients' behavior in terms of the way they're doing things, I think we're knocking on an open door. I think they want to do it already. They need to be shown how they can change those processes. But as soon as you start talking to a client and say, look, you don't need to get the perfect stimulus, you can adapt and you can test and learn, you can throw in ideas and move on, then they get it because that's what they're doing in other aspects of the business already.
And I just want to spin this sideways now for yourself, but for some of the others too, and pick up on the point that Lenny was making about automation. Why do we tend to assume that an automated product is faster, cheaper, but not as good? Because outside of art, most really good stuff is the product of automation. And I was at a conference in January. There's a really bad storm. It was in Paris. And a couple of the other delegates told me the storm was so bad the autopilot had to land the plane. And you kind of think, so why in research do we have this really negative view so often about automation?
I think I have an opinion on that, if I may. I think in the past we have done a good job of automating basic tasks, but we haven't done as great a job at building the intelligence of the researcher into the tech. And so that's the challenge for us as we automate. Lots of times automation is designed to take super clear instructions and take the doing fingers out of the way. But in research, oftentimes the fingers are doing more complex AI type things, and we haven't in the past done as great a job at making sure that the research intelligence is built into the text so that we don't add bias.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, when we work with agencies and we think of ourselves as automating best human thinking, there is not only skepticism but concern about isn't that what we do? So you do have people who are quite antagonistic towards the idea that we can automate great thinking. And I think that's a natural concern.
Yeah, I really do think that he who integrates the researcher's mind into the tech will win. Lenny, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's interesting. I was on a discussion yesterday with a major CPG company who actually is shifting their focus from insights into analytics. And one of the primary drivers of that shift is, they're working more with Watson and other AI companies like Palantir. These big, massive AI-driven analytics companies, with the assumption that they can get to the output from research, right? The insight, the data that will drive the insight, utilizing that application of automation instead of the more traditional kind of fuzzy front end of insights generation that has been the realm of research. And that's something we have to, as an industry, have to pay a lot of attention to. The automation around analytics, which is where the actionable data comes through, is something that there's a much bigger industry than ours that is well ahead of us already. in that arena. So it's a slippery slope for us as an industry.
Ray here, and I started that comment with Ray here because we've had a quick request come in on the GoToWebinar tool. If we could, when we chime in, just say who we are, especially since we have 2 English accents and 2 female American accents. We all know who we are, but it would be great if we could try to do that. And just before we move on, we've got a comment out there in Twitter from LeBright, who's been with us all week. Thank you so much. Chiming in here on agility. Clients don't always have budget or autonomy. Iterative tests are too open. Deliverables very tightly negotiated. So I think all of that plays back to what Stephen was saying in terms of some of the hurdles, some of the rethinking that needs to be done. So with that, Kristin, and this time you won't need to say who you are because I've just done that for you. What have you brought along for us?
Hi, it's Kristin. Well, you know, one of the key trends, or I guess themes that I'm looking at in 2016 is really this idea around simplification. And I think as researchers, we're notorious and sort of have a bad habit of making things a lot more complex than they truly need to be. If you've seen me speak at all at a conference in the last year, you've probably seen me bring up this example of these surveys that I get from Expedia. So I travel quite a bit. I book a lot of my travel using Expedia. And every time I get off my flight or I check into my hotel, they send me just a very simple survey. It's literally a smiley face and a frowny face. You know, did I experience or a bad experience? That's it. Now, I'm not saying that could we dumb down all of our research surveys to be that simple? No. But I also think that there's a lot of times when we labor to kind of design a 45-minute survey that digs into every minutia of the buying experience, which is something, you know, that Melanie alluded to when she was speaking earlier. You know, when we get into surveys like that, I really truly believe that respondent engagement and subsequently data quality really suffer. And so I think the more that we can really embrace this idea of simplification, the better. And I think it also wears other hats, you know. As researchers, I think lots of times we discard methods or don't think of them as simple because for us it creates more work because it involves doing things differently. It involves us adopting new ways or redesigning our questionnaires or taking on new technologies. And there's lots of examples of this, you know, that I sort of see out in the industry from, you know, virtual reality. You know, I think when it was introduced by Lieberman at a conference, it may have even been IEX, Lenny, a few years ago, people really scoffed at it, you know, and were like, oh, that's a waste of time, or, you know, that technology is never going to apply. And now, you know, Google has announced that they're investing a ton of money in that space and a lot of money and building a team around it. And so I think that, you know, from everything from video-driven interviews and, you know, incentive delivery via mobile devices to gamification, some of the work Betty Adamu is doing, you know, they might not seem simple to us because we have to adopt new ways of doing things, but they make the research process so much simpler for respondents. And I think, you know, from an engagement perspective, we have just so many opportunities to connect with consumers in more interactive ways. Again, something Melanie talked about earlier, that would make that research process really more rewarding. And that also goes for how we interact with clients. And Melanie, you mentioned this, you know, that we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we speed up the time of delivery to clients and how do we make that delivery easier. And we are seeing a migration of that in the industry, you know, rather than delivering these really lengthy reports. You know, there is more of a focus on dashboarding and how do we deliver KPIs that really speak to clients' business needs, and so that all is encompassed in this kind of idea of simplification. And I will say, as part of SMR Council, you know, we just spent 2 days kind of meeting and going through some of the key initiatives. We have research choices being one of them, and I can say we're all really excited about it. And certainly, if we can simplify research, you know, I think more people will choose to participate in research. So, you know, simplification is something that kind of drives everything thematically.
So there's definitely a theme emerging here.
Faster and simpler.
Yeah, faster, simpler. Technology drives that, and hopefully through that process we engage with consumers more effectively. It's probably the summation there. But Kristin, do you think that there's a shift towards a greater focus on UX and on design within the research process? We certainly have that in the deliverables, I think, but are we getting that idea that we need to borrow from design thinking within the survey or research process itself?
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, I mean, I would love to be optimistic about our survey design, but, you know, when I think about the surveys that I come in contact with on a weekly basis, I mean, there were 3 different surveys that I attempted from my phone just this week alone that I abandoned within the first 2 pages, either because they didn't render correctly, they didn't make any sense, they were too long, you know, and so, you know, do I think as an industry that we're adopting design thinking? No, I don't. Do I think we should? Absolutely. But I think that there's a big disconnect between what we say and what we aspire to do and then what we actually deliver on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so shameless plug, but one of the companies that I work with, AYTM, it's amazing watching what they do because they started from a design standpoint. The CEO is a designer, right? So the way they've approached, I'm really not plugging them, but they are an interesting example. If you're not familiar with them, go check them out. Because the way they've approached the survey process is from that design perspective. And some of the workarounds are, as a researcher, we think, well, but that's not how we do that. But yet it works really well.
Right.
And they've had a hard time getting significant traction. So, I mean, they're doing well, but, you know, people have not glommed onto them. I think they should have been the next SurveyMonkey. But the SurveyMonkey took the traditional research route and just made it really, you know, easy and cheap to do that, where companies that have tried to do something different have had a much harder go. So where's the breaking point or the tipping point where we can support companies like that?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I'm having a really similar experience to you. I just started a consultancy with a UX firm, and the way that they conduct research, because they have a whole research arm there, is vastly different than what I've seen in any of the other firms that I work with. So, I think, again, part of it is, you know, getting some new thinking into the more traditional research companies. You know, if you have a UX designer or somebody that's familiar with design theory and design practices, that's really powerful. You know, one of the big initiatives, and I'm sure Finn can speak more to this, that we have at SMR is youth and millennials, and how do we get new thinking, you know, into these companies? You know, because I feel like, you know, even me, you know, I'm in my 40s, maybe I don't even get it. You know, maybe what works for me on a mobile device isn't something that would work for someone in their 20s. So I do think it's about, you know, trying to get as many opinions and then to really be thoughtful about how do we integrate that in ways that, you know, allow us to keep research best practices, but or actually delivering something meaningful.
Kristin, do you mind if I ask you a question? Just thinking about, this is Steve again, yourself and Finn being on the panel. Our industry lives and dies by whether consumers will engage with us, but we continue to abuse them and ask them 25-minute long questionnaires that are boring and full of grids, etc. Is there not a role for SMR to play? Is there not a role for the code of conduct to play in ensuring that we stop abusing people and bring in design concepts and simplicity?
Finn here. Thanks for the easy one, Steve. I think there are... Sorry, I'm stuttering now just when I'm trying to get my thinking straight. I think there are so many elements that contribute to the challenge, I guess, of of when and how and in what manner you ask questions. And I'm kind of broaching a little bit onto what I was going to come to, but I think there are cases where short, sharp, simple, and often automated, should be the only solution that we adopt in trying to determine the information that we're seeking. Yet there are other cases, I suspect, where such an approach might not fulfill the need. And I think there we equally have to be cognizant that it should be the need that drives that, and perhaps not the legacy or the comfort zone. You know, God knows, I'm sure all of us have been chatting with people who said, oh, well, you know, I've got this survey and it's really short. It's only 130 pages and, you know, it's only got 49 grids. But the numbers that come out of it are the ones that I use to determine, you know, salary uplifts and bonus payments, and have done so for the last 15 years. And suggesting that that survey be moved to 3 questions on a mobile phone going forward is a really tough change to make, both philosophically and corporately. So I think we do need to be perhaps a little better at understanding some of those contexts, but being far more proactive in driving the change, which is here. You know, guys, if you're not on the train, it's maybe it's not even leaving the station, maybe it's long gone. But I do think we have to be a little more sensitive to those contexts, and yet drive many of the things that you know, Melanie, Steve, and Kristin have spoken about in making sure that, and here it comes, the stuff that we do is fit for purpose. Sorry, intro to segue maybe into what I was going to say.
Before we go to that, though, research now is of the opinion that when you have a big, complex problem that affects so many people, you try to find the one common point that could have the most impact. And in our minds, we think that he who programs the surveys has the best chance at having an effect on this. And so we have put a lot of time, energy, money, investment into looking at every survey that comes through our walls and really trying to coach clients on the implications of their choices. Yes, you can do that, but mobile respondents won't take it now, and now your data is not representative of the mobile people. And so I really think that if the survey programmers of the world, and there's not that many of them, the people that program surveys, if those people will be much more involved in survey creation, survey best practices, I think you have the best chance. With our work, we reduced our average survey length in 1 year by 2 minutes. We were over 15, and now we're well under 15 for the average survey that we execute at Research Now, and we do a lot of surveys. And so 2 minutes off in a little over a year, between a year or two, is a really good metric, and we hope to continue that trend.
Okay, Ray here. I'm just chipping in with a few things that have come through on the questions. We've got one here which was talking about, okay, using all the buzzwords, Agile, test, learn, simplification, and so on. What are we going to do with complex problems? Is nobody doing conjoint anymore? And what I would say to that, and I won't let Stephen talk about conjoint because he has a peculiar view. Well, I will in a moment, Stephen. But there's a fascinating thing, and it links really well to what Kristin was saying about simplification. So because of developments in aggregate logic, because of developments in hierarchical Bayes and multi-level models, instead of asking people lots of questions, there are companies like Skim out there asking people 3 questions, 3 trade-offs only, in a mobile questionnaire, and they are making their life for them really complex, but they're making the life for the respondent and the client really simple. I want to test this. Respondents or participants get to see some really straightforward, simple, easy to make choices, and all the hard stuff is done in the automation, and that is really how we should be tying those things together. We've got a great comment here from Leonie about simplification, that we've got to avoid dumbing down, which we do see a lot of, particularly sometimes from the DIY, sometimes actually from the so-called good agencies, to make sure that we have elegant simplification where something complex has been made simple through good design. I'm just going to check this last comment here. Overcomplication leading to problems. So I think there's a lot of support for your view there, Kristin, in terms of simplification.
Yeah, so this is Melanie. I would say I love Albert Einstein's quote, make things as simple as they can be, but not a single bit simpler. So, we have to learn not to overcomplicate, but we have to be careful not to oversimplify.
Okay, so exactly on schedule. Finn, what have you brought from the august home of SMR?
Well, thank you, Ray. I think I've probably introduced it already, and I'm also extraordinarily fortunate, I think, because I hope what I'm about to say is a kind of an easy summary of what all my esteemed predecessors have spoken about. One of the things that I really would like to see in the coming year, and which we're certainly going to try and drive hard in terms of awareness and application, is this concept of fit for purpose. There are many instances when either surveys might be oversimplified, overcomplicated, adopt a certain methodology that may not necessarily be appropriate in a given jurisdiction or to cover a certain topic, which lead to inevitably problems of either interpretation or application, which might have negative impact on findings. And by and large, the criticism for that happening tends to fall right back on the industry as a whole, rather than necessarily on any individual who would have made a decision or supported it. And I think what we really do need to do is be far more proactive, as I've mentioned earlier, in providing real guidance as to when and where we should be doing certain types of research and which mechanisms we ought to be adopting. You know, Steve's point about automation, the fact that we can now automate many of the key analyses that were traditionally produced by people is a wonderful tool, as he points out, to speed up the process of interpreting that data and providing that thinking. I'm repeating what he said, but if you look at the car industry, you know, much of the design may still be done by humans, although that to certain degrees is being automated. But once the design is done by those guys, it all gets shipped into the production line, and hundreds of cars at great prices get rolled off that particular or out through that particular factory door. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to mention Volkswagen, so maybe I better get that concept out of the way before I follow that analogy through too long. But it is in the ability of us as researchers who know what the different methodologies can and can't do, that the onus is on us to be really driving this through hard to say, look, stop doing the stuff with 58 questions and 49 grids. Start using the 3 questions and providing the evidence to those that are still doubtful around that particular methodological adoption to say it does work. I mean, we've enough evidence to show, God knows, we have, 50 conferences a year, all of which show great examples of all the different applications that are going on, to try and ensure that we do kind of we keep following the evolution that not only our clients are demanding, that not only the business context is demanding, but that also the contributors and our participants are demanding. Somebody once said, the great thing about having, it was a sailing analogy, right? So they said, look, an anchor is not just something that roots you in the past. It's also something that shows you the way that you have to go in the future. And I think that's where we kind of have a responsibility to say, yes, you need some feedback, immediate feedback on this campaign. Do a social media exercise. Don't try and do, I don't know, an omnibus survey or whatever. And again, I'm oversimplifying perhaps the argument, but it does frustrate me that with all of the great knowledge that exists in our industry, we're just not always as forward, perhaps, in helping to promote and in helping to advocate to all of the users and beneficiaries of research, all of the fantastic things that are going on. So it's a plea, I guess, more than anything else, to say, fit for purpose doesn't mean doing either strange or odd or wacky research. It's about doing stuff that's fit for purpose, and we really, really need to push that story out there.
Finn, doesn't part of being fit for purpose mean that the industry has to highlight stuff that doesn't work, either doesn't work in general or doesn't work in that situation, just as much as we have to highlight and promote stuff that does work?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. And I mean, God knows them. I'm sorry, I am coming back to the topic, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I think the recent, the recent polling scenario in the UK is an ideal example thereof. You know, we adopted a certain methodology. It clearly had limitations, and you know the expectations that were driven by those methodologies were way off and resulted in one politician promising to eat his hat, although he never did, on air live. So, you know, yes, you know, own up, be transparent.
But what about the business issues around this? I mean, so I totally agree with what you're saying, 100%. But the business reality is that, you know, most research has developed through big, to your analogy, production, you know, assembly line research. You know, that's what supports scale, right? So so it's hard for the companies that are trying to either own IP, the black box model, or to scale IP through productization to be adaptable. So there's intrinsic issues with the business model for a lot of companies that I think is a real significant barrier here for suppliers to advocate fit for purpose for experimentation as well.
You're very right, and I think that the way that companies have got around that is through the acquisition model. Knowing that they can't change their business model of source, they'll simply go out and acquire. And I guess, you know, from an opportunity perspective, that means that great, you know, the more startups there are doing this stuff in a new, alternate, agile, quick, simplified way, the better, because, you know, there are just companies out there waiting to buy you up if you've got that particular offering. So the change in the business model, I'm not sure is necessarily it is a hurdle. Is it the only hurdle to us trying to promote all of the wonderful new kinds of, and you know, again, I'm being very kind of generic here, but the wonderful new kinds of research that are available are just as valuable, just as valid, and just as appropriate in certain contexts. And you know, it's a kind of it's a favorite rant of mine, I guess, to say, look, you know, do it, try it. It's good. It's not, you know, it doesn't have to be a 4,000 random probability sample pen and paper questionnaire with 6,000 questions. And again, I'm oversimplifying. But there's this huge opportunity that's facing us that if we don't avail of it, somebody else sure as hell will. So, you know, be brave. Take the leap, as Lieberman used to ask us to do with their virtual reality goggles. You know, take that leap. It does work.
Hey, Lenny, it's Kristin. You know, I think, you know, to support some of what Finn is saying, you know, I think we're saying that, oh, that traditional business model doesn't support these more agile techniques, and that people don't want to change the business model because it's too challenging, or they're going to lose revenue because of it. But I think when we think about that, it's going one step further. I mean, first of all, most of us have had 10 years to adopt a new business model. I mean, you could see it coming with the advent of online and certainly with mobile. So it's not like this was something that just came up a month ago. You know, we've had plenty of time as an industry to start adapting our methods. But I think also it's about, you know, whether or not we're going to have respondents that want to take those types of surveys 5 years from now. You know, so even if we don't adopt the new business model, it's basically saying we're putting ourselves out of business because respondents won't engage with us anymore.
Ray here, we're going to take sorry, Lenny, taking two quick questions from the floor for Finn. One is, are new criteria needed to distinguish between dumb research and elegant research, as the interface can look the same? And that would also apply to the point that Kristin was raising. But one specifically for Finn, who pays for this change, the research agency or the client?
Two great questions, by the way. The first one, who differentiates between dumb and elegant? Well, I mean, I think if you have a relationship with an agency and with a supplier of research, I think they will help you very quickly determine, you know, what is dumb and what is elegant. Perhaps the danger sometimes, and I know from a personal perspective, when I go and talk to certain, you know, first and second year university students about research, the dangers, I guess, at that point that we don't necessarily provide some of the learnings that we've picked up over the last number of years around, simple things like question structure, et cetera, that can make that fine line between dumb and elegant a whole lot more easy to define and to establish. So yes, we have work to do, and I'm not saying it's easy, but equally, we have a phenomenal amount of knowledge and experience between us all. So I think those messages can be broadcast and can bring that level up to the place that we need it to be. As for the payment of who makes the change, I think change goes on every day in every discipline in every company, and there comes a point where each company recognizes that evolution has either a cost or an associated revenue benefit or a cost improvement which will make their business more efficient. And to Kristin's point that she just mentioned a moment ago, is it going to be cheaper to continue with a fairly wieldy survey that needs to be addressed to at least 50,000 people in order to get your 500 sample? And we can talk about strike rates and response rates hereafter. Or does it make more sense to, and by the way, the fieldwork costs for that would be phenomenal, as we all know, or does it make sense to try and invest a little bit in something that is more agile, as Steve said, that allows you a greater, measure, learn, repeat, or not kind of approach, and cost it that way? I don't think it's always necessarily a question of it has to be yet another payout, which is going to hit yet another budget. I think we all know clients that have adopted or trialed new research mechanisms and new methodologies because they know that they're getting information either faster or quicker or in a cycle that is more attuned to their own business needs than necessarily, an original or a more traditional research proposal might have presented. So I'm not always sure it means more money or more cost to any one party. I think it's a more complex mix than that.
I would say it's actually the opposite. And Steve and Mel probably talked to this themselves, that clients are recognizing that this is from my own work from on the Gen 2 side, that they can get the data that they need faster and cheaper, and that's driving the migration to companies like Zappy, GutCheck, Research Now. You guys just rolled out an automation kind of off-the-shelf, ready-to-wear research platform, et cetera, et cetera. Those companies are thriving because that transition is already happening. And it's not that those budgets are going away on the client side. They're reinvesting it in either the new stuff or more strategic research that can drive the needle for the business more effectively. So that is happening already. It's being led by the big spenders in research. So that's the good news. Mel and Steve, would you agree, or am I off base in that assessment?
No, this is Melanie. I do agree. We don't actually often see these changes being held up by pricing and cost concerns. They're more often held up by adoption and just wanting to do things the way we've always done them for fear of the change itself. And so usually there's not a check to write, and in fact a lot of times there's a smaller check to write than you write the other way. So I agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of desire from the client side to make this move. I do think that it is a behaviour change. So if you've done something the same way for the last 10 years, it is hard to move. But I think there's quite a lot of desire to move that way, and a lot of the time, as Melanie was saying, it's cheaper.
So,
you're right, guys. Sorry if I mispresented it. I don't think it's what I was trying to say was I don't think it's a question of always having to pay more in order to affect that change. But apologies if I misrepresented that. It was quite the opposite, actually.
Thanks, Finn. Okay, we're going to move to a topic that's come from the floor. Right at the get-go, we had a really interesting question here from Ilkup. So companies like Google are collecting massive amounts of data on consumer behavior. So can we use predictive analytics with things like the transactional data, the observational data, or the passively collected mobile data to replace and do a much better job than some of the focus groups, some of the surveys, and so on? Also, on that point, we've got a contribution from Joel online talking about, can we use social media? Should we be using social media? We are going to be using social media to replace some of those elements. So how do we take all of that on board going forward? What is the right mix? And what is the near future? I think the long-term future is interesting, but probably the near future is more important.
And
I don't think research does have a significant play there. Go ahead, Steve.
So I think we're, as an industry, we're in an experimentation stage with a lot of this data. I think TNS have been doing some great work that they've presented at IIX and other forums, trying to use social media data as a predictor of where tracking data is going. I think there's still questions around social media data and its representativeness. I suspect additional modeling is required to validate some of it. So I think it's a very interesting, exciting area. I'm not sure it's the answer, but it's certainly a part of the answer.
I think if you look at these things, this is effectively what's being driven through programmatic advertising. And the companies that Ilka mentioned, Google, for instance, or Facebook, or that's what that data is being utilized for. They're capturing this data to determine what a consumer's interests are before the consumer's even said, that is my interest. And that is what drives advertising at this point. Does research have a play in helping to inform that as a data source? Yes. But is research going to own it? I don't think so. I think that the advertising, particularly the technology-driven advertising companies, they are the ones who will own it because they already do.
Yeah, I do think that, this is Melanie, I do believe that we will do more and more with the data that's readily available to us, and we'll integrate it more than we ever have before in the coming years. I mean, we've talked about this last year, and it's coming true. We are absolutely integrating more behavioral and passive data. We have to remember we can only integrate and collect as much behavioral data as the consumers will allow us to. And in order for them to feel comfortable letting us do that, we have to establish these trust relationships and not breach their trust. So it comes back to that thing I said earlier about, follow the consumer, follow the customer, follow their desires and wishes and dreams, and give them a good value proposition and make it easy and safe and fun for them to participate in this process with us. But when we do that and we get their permission and their trust, we can do a lot of cool things with the data that already exists. Ask what we only have to ask and observe what we can observe, and that future is coming true now.
Some of the most interesting work I've seen recently is coming from companies like Game Theory and Bottom Line Analytics, who have taken some traditional market research data, masses and masses of metrics, digital analytics, social media listening, in order to create their media mix modeling to give good attribution. And I'm with Lenny. We are not, the MR industry is not going to own this process, but we absolutely have to have people with those skills in our teams to do that bridging, so that our part is given the right prominence, it's continued to be shaped, so it fits. If we've got a process with a hexagonal hole, we need to make sure that we're producing hexagonal nuts to go in it, and not keep on sending our old-fashioned nuts and bolts to our own standard.
Yeah, and there are examples in the research industry of companies who are doing that, or at least companies I think are part of the research industry. Marketing Evolution, Rex Briggs, Joel, there's a shout out for you. I know he's listening. They're doing that, and they kind of play on both ends, that intermediary between the marketing and the research organizations. IRI, ComScore, what they're doing with the acquisition of Rentrack, and so there's certainly key players who are moving in those directions, and I think they're the ones to really pay attention to. But also bear in mind that Google Consumer Surveys, and I'm on the board and was a big fan of that. But Google Consumer Surveys' biggest client is Google. That's how they optimize. The survey model is integrated into Google's advertising business. So they use that to fill in the gaps. It's a fantastic example of where we're heading, is thinking of how they've done things with their own tools, data.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things is nearly every leading tech company you can think of, the Googles, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the Yahoos, etc., they run online research communities with one provider or another, because the more you know about what people do, the more you want to talk to them to find out why they do it and what they might do next and what else they've seen. So it is about making those connections.
I think,
and they all have survey capabilities. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is Stephen. The other thing is, bear in mind that social media data and sales data and all that wonderful big data is typically of use only post-launch, whether it's post-launch of a product or post-launch of an ad. And we used to use market research to work out whether an ad was doing well by surveying people, just because we couldn't get sales data quick enough. Good research should be used before launch, and that's when you do need to ask people about something that you're showing them. You can't have behavioral data because it's not there. You can't use social media analytics because it's not out there. So there's always going to be a role for that type of research, and that's where we should be playing anyway.
One of my favorite quotes, and I think it's mine, but who knows, I may have stolen it, is big data can only predict big data can only predict the past, which actually is really useful because most things happening in the future have happened in the past. But it is one of the, as Stephen says, one of the significant limitations. So Lenny, have you noticed that we have gone crazy in this industry in terms of mergers, acquisitions, consolidations?
Absolutely, because I keep trying to get people to pay me to help them do that. So yeah, I've certainly noticed, and it is crazy. I think we're in an unprecedented period of activity in this industry, primarily kind of from two fronts. One is the private equity groups making plays, Research Now, SSI, Focus Vision, examples of that. So now companies that were kind of at the 100 to 500 million level in revenue have very deep backers, so they're becoming very acquisitive now to get to that next level. And then we're seeing additional consolidation, very targeted, where the larger players, and right now it seems to be GFK more than anybody, making acquisitions to enhance their capabilities and maybe future-proof themselves, as well as the activity from, which is not talked about as much, but Nielsen and Kantar continuing to make investments, smaller scale investments, in a lot of startups. So it's a very healthy and robust part of our industry right now is lots of money flowing in lots of different ways. And it's kind of shaking up the status quo. So what we don't see is Ipsos doing much. And we're seeing companies that are now looming to try and go head-to-head with the big four and are probably funded enough to do that. So the next year or so, I think, is going to be really interesting from that perspective. So thoughts from the panel on maybe kind of what to look for, or are we misreading this boom of financial activity? I'll ask Kristin first, since she most recently sold a company or was involved in the selling of a company in one of these scenarios. So,
I mean, I'm not sure I'm clear on the question, Lenny. Do you think this kind of consolidation is a trend?
Yes. And
yeah.
Is it a sustainable trend, and what are the broader implications?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because I think it kind of plays back to something that Finn said earlier, which is, that a lot of these acquisitions are around trying to acquire technologies that maybe some of the larger companies just don't have the ability to build in-house, or it's already built and so they'd rather buy. Certainly, that was the case at Decipher. When we had our research platform, I mean, for most companies, they're not going to go out and build a data collection platform from scratch anymore. There's too many other firms already doing it. It's not worth the investment in the build. But certainly, as a buy for a much larger company, it makes good sense. So, I do see more of that in the future as some of these larger, more traditional firms keep trying to embrace new technology. In most cases, assuming it's available, it's almost always easier to buy versus build.
Well,
Yeah,
they could of course, they could of course partner the other way.
Partner or make an investment, yeah, absolutely.
This is Mel. I do not see it so much as consolidation, because actually the number of companies in our industry is growing, not shrinking. It's just that there's all these cool, great little startups out there that are doing neat stuff with tech that's enabling this trend of speed, automation, and simplification. And so they're able to do it off of, from scratch code rather than trying to, get through the advanced code that already exists in a lot of these companies. So there's just such great tech out there that sometimes it's easier to just pop it under your umbrella than try to build it yourself. And it's just our industry starting to look and act a bit more like a tech industry than it used to.
Ray here. So one interesting difference with the last round, which is quite a few years ago now when we had a lot of mergers, acquisitions, was on that occasion it was the Cinnovates and people like that, and they were buying clients and they were buying geographies. And this time around it really doesn't look as though it's about either geographies or clients.
Yeah, agree. I think it is tech, but that brings up an interesting point that our challenge, since those type of plays are easier. The geography or client plays, right? That's a 1.5, 2 times multiple. That's fairly easy to fund. It could be stock transactions, et cetera, et cetera. But with this new category that we're seeing, I agree with you, Mel, that we are looking more like a tech company. But as an industry, I don't think we're able to pay tech multipliers. And that's where the private equity money is coming in. So there's an interesting synergy now emerging where a company, let's call it Acme Sample, is not necessarily able to pay a 10 times multiplier for the cool new tech company. But the private equity group backing them allows them to maybe get to a 7-time multiplier, something of that nature, which, if they go in early enough, can enable these deals to happen. But it's that imperative from a time standpoint that I think is most interesting, because the longer somebody waits to make a play for one of these new companies, the more the potential acquirers, or the list of potential acquirers, shrinks because they just can't afford it. So
Lenny,
almost by necessity. Go ahead.
Yeah, most of these
Sorry,
numbers.
I was pontificating.
Yeah, well, no. It's a point I wanted to sort of push you on, because another possible explanation for why these deals are going through now is that difference between 10x and 7x. Maybe a lot of the vendors have stopped being so precious and saying we expect to get 10x because we are a tech company, and are beginning to settle for a little bit less. And maybe the amount people are willing to pay has gone up because of the external funding, but maybe the amount that people are expecting has come down as those deals didn't happen last year.
Maybe. There's
I wouldn't say that.
You don't think that, Kristin?
I mean, it's Kristin. No. I mean, most of the companies that I'm advising that are looking at either an investment or at getting acquired in the next 2 to 3 years are definitely gunning for that 10x multiplier. And I think there have been a few companies that I'm working with now that have gotten lower offers and declined them. So I definitely think that expectation is still there. I've also, when I talk to a number of full-service research firms, I think a lot of full-service firms are looking at, hey, what's my opportunity to monetize my business down the road? And if they don't have a tech player, a tech component, they're certainly looking at a lower valuation. And so I do think that we're seeing more interest in full-service firms that are looking further down the line, thinking, gosh, full-service firms aren't really selling right now. And then what's my opportunity to actually move toward an acquisition event at some point? Maybe that involves an investment in a tech company or a tech play.
This is Steve. Do you think, so it's a question for you, Lenny, in some ways. Of course, tech companies get higher multiples, but they get higher multiples because they tend to be more profitable, at least when they're mature. Do you think, and the reason the research companies can't pay tech multiples is because their business model makes them not profitable enough?
It's part of it. I mean, so I think there's a direct correlation between the multiple and the scalability of the system. So that means that the more human-driven it is, the less scalable it is. So that's a big piece of it.
It's also about recurring revenue and subscription revenue. Tech often has a more stable revenue stream, and when you buy these companies and they're not at scale yet, that's an important piece of it. You know, you can get 10 times multiples when you're not at scale yet, and being acquired by a larger company can help you get at scale more quickly. So profitability, recurring revenue, and scale.
Yes. Well, I think that's a really great point, Mel. That's really probably the role of the larger companies now, is to help these companies scale more effectively by getting in earlier. So I totally agree with you. But again, the type of companies or the number of companies that can play in that arena is relatively small. It's probably the Hannah Michael top 25 that really are candidates to do that, and not otherwise. It's external tech companies.
Okay, we're into the last.
Be biting very much.
Sorry, Lenny. We're into the final rundown. So I'm going to take one more question from the floor, which is very specifically for Finn, but as a council member, Kristin may well have a view, and in fact, the whole panel may have a view. Any thoughts on the new data protection regulations recently presented at SMR to go into effect in 2018? And these are principally European, but they will have global implications.
Gosh, any thoughts? Yes, lots of them.
About 2 minutes maximum of thoughts.
Okay. Well, the new GDPR is I think in both ours and FAMRO's perspective, as the two bodies that did most of the lobbying on this particular piece of legislation. The new GDPR is actually a pretty good piece of paper for us, and that's thanks to the guts of 3 years' worth of work.
Finn, GDPR for the rest of the audience?
Oh, I'm sorry, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is what that piece of paper is referred to as. It's a pretty good outcome for us, and it will not only facilitate much of what we've been doing to date, but it will facilitate a little more besides, thus allowing our innovative elements to keep flourishing. Where there are still challenges, and I mean Lenny made reference to it a little while back, are things like programmatic. Now, stuff that happens on programmatic currently in many legislations in Europe is just simply illegal because it's based on a cookie mechanism which has yet to be decided upon centrally by the European legislators. But as it currently stands, the data protection for us is a good thing. And again, I've got to give a shout out of thanks to the teams that worked on it. We think it's been a really big win for our industry, and it's something that we should all be thankful we've got in.
Just as a quick aside, there was a blog article, Lenny, on Greenbook recently, who speaks for the research industry, and there is a little technical point which people in Europe should know. FAMRO and SMR, by law, speak for the research industry in terms of the European Parliament. They don't speak to everybody, and we should be thankful, those of us who pay our subs, that that's part of the role that those two organizations do.
Absolutely.
So let's go round the panel in the order that they all spoke. And the question is, what have you heard today that's caught your eye, is going to make you think a bit more, something you're going to take forward and perhaps pursue more?
So this is Melanie. I'll start since I started. I'm going to think even more about tech-enabled using the intelligence of the researcher in the tech world and figuring out how to use tech to increase ease and simplification for the survey experience. That's really where I feel like we need the most traction and where we need the most progress is using tech to get at simpler, easier survey experiences.
Hi, and this is Steve. I'll echo that and a bit of what Kristin was talking about in terms of simplification and design. And if we can have those as two of the mantras that we're doing whenever we're creating new research, I think that's very useful for us and everyone else.
Yeah, hi, it's Kristin. It's interesting because I think I mentioned, Finn and I have just gotten out of 2 days of council meetings, and I think SMR council meetings, and I think all the topics that we discussed here today are all things that we've been talking about as a council. And so I think, when I think about the work that I'm doing with my clients, which is largely unrelated to research these days and more on growth strategy, certainly when I think about carrying themes forward and what I really need to keep my eye on, it's definitely within the context of SMR Council and how can we serve our members better when we look at these emerging methods and new things.
And this is Finn here, and I guess everything that I've heard today just simply reinforces for me what an incredibly strong message we have to get out to business, buyers, and participants and contributors alike. And as I said, it's been a kind of a hobby horse of mine to really shout out loud about the great things that we do, whether it's through our diligence towards our contributors, whether it's about trying to ensure that we spend more thinking time by automating, or whether it's by simplifying, and or indeed in cases where we're doing very sophisticated stuff if it requires more complicated research, to make it fit for purpose. I think what we do is truly amazing, and I'm going to redouble my efforts just to shout that out from the treetops, that all of the people in this profession do some amazing stuff.
And I think I came up with the next IIEX event. The IIEX UX Design Forum. So you heard it here first. That's an important topic. And there probably needs to be, and I'm half joking about whether we do that with IEX, but I think that paying attention to UX as part of the research process is something that needs a lot more attention. And we need to find more outlets to include that within the traditional industry. So I will be cogitating on that as we go forward.
Now, I'm just going to circle back because there's an interesting comment from Joel in Twitter that I think is worth feeding back to Finn. Finn, did you say programmatic is illegal? Profile data that drives 15 billion in advertising is now attachable to survey data. Please explain. So is programmatic really powerful? Yes. Is it legal in Europe the way it's currently done and configured?
In certain jurisdictions it's not, but it hasn't been. So there's a thing in Europe at the moment called the e-privacy directive, which is a piece of legislation that European Parliament and legislators are now discussing. When the first draft of that particular legislation came out, it would certainly have said that all cookie-based tracking mechanisms were illegal. Now, certain governments in Europe have decided that in particular, for example, the Dutch, they've taken a decision that says that there are certain cookies that are absolutely essential for the efficient operation of the internet. And thus they've taken a decision to allow many of these to continue. But it is a very, very gray area at the moment. Based on the original draft, any programmatic that is sourced from some form of cookie drop would be considered illegal. But as I said, it is a draft piece of legislation that has not been finalized, and that is the next one up for debate now that the data protection regulation has been sorted out.
And I think
illegal.
60% of programmatic. Sorry, just real quick. That 60% of programmatic is driven by mobile, which is not cookie driven. So that's probably an important thing to keep in mind in this conversation.
Right, but Finn, illegal is only when you haven't been able to get an explicit opt-in from a person who is allowing the cookie, right? If you're getting an explicit opt-in, then it is legal. Right. That's why I made the comment earlier that while there's lots of opportunity for these drive-by surveys and finding people in the moment and asking them questions, for things like big data and long-tail data sets, you need people who are opting into a trusted environment. And that's why panels won't die anytime soon.
Absolutely.
Also increasingly yeah, but it's also part of the terms of service for most apps. So I agree with you, Mel, but let's not fool ourselves in thinking that that explicit consent is not being given via app downloads on mobile. It is.
No, that's fine. I just meant. No, that's fine. I just meant when you're trying to put it all together and integrate it all, and you want to do this app plus this app, you need sort of a central holding place where people are allowing you to integrate that kind of data through explicit consent, and that's where panels can fill a role.
Yep. Agreed.
I think for mortals, we mostly just need to keep an eye on this and keep hoping that the likes of FAMRO and SMR will keep making sure that our interests are looked after. But in terms of opt-in, Lenny, the jurisdiction case against Facebook was that, yes, people had opted into it in the terms of services, but the court ruled that they probably hadn't read it, so retargeting based on non-Facebook sites was illegal, and they were going to fine them a large amount of money every single day with the prospect of criminal charges down the road. And not surprisingly, Facebook changed the behavior. And these are the sort of things that other people are going to have to sort out. We're certainly not. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming along today. I hope it's been as interesting for everybody out there listening. From the looks of the comments, the tweets, and all of that, I think it probably has. So I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who listened. A big thank you to all of you on the panel here today.